was born in Brookhaven, Mississippi, October 23rd, 1942, during the war. My mother was from that area. She lived out from Brookhaven. She was a school teacher, and my father was a school teacher. And we moved when I was 4 years old over to Perkinston, where I grew up. Having two school teachers as parents, I learned how to read at an early age, and I would say that the great leveler for me and the opportunity for me actually came through education, because none of my ancestors, as far as I know, had been lawyers. So I wasn't from a legal family. My father went on and he believed in a good work ethic, and so he went on and ultimately became the elected county superintendent of education in the little county we were from, Stone County. And there in that courthouse, because his office was in the courthouse, I got to see some real giants of the law. Boyce Holloman, who was the new DA at the time, and Joel Blass, who was the attorney for the school board and later became a member of the Mississippi Supreme Court, and Bob Newton, who was an estate and corporate kind of lawyer, but a very fine attorney. And so I looked on the law as being a noble calling, and I didn't really know that that's what I was going to do when I went to college. And incidentally, it was not whether I was going to go to college, it was which college I was going to go to. And that was a big deal in that time, because a lot of my compatriots did not go to college and didn't have that opportunity. So I went 2 years at Perkinston Junior College and had the opportunity to travel some when I was there. And got to, and we did a thing back in high school and in junior college, in which I met a lot of good people who later became lawyers. I met Judge Pickering, for example, at Youth Congress when he was the president pro tem of the Senate, and I was the Speaker of the House in the little youth Congress that they had, where the legislature would let us use the chambers of the legislature to do that. So all of that was really kind of an inspiration to a country kid like me, and got to go see the world a little bit. I spent the summer of 1961 as an elevator boy for my congressman, who was Bill Calmer from down here in South Mississippi, and I got to meet. I actually got to see JFK. In the Showroom Hotel, a very magnetic, charismatic character. I got to meet and converse briefly with LBJ at the Texas State Society picnic, and got to meet Sam Rayburn, who was the Speaker of the House at the time. So I moved around with some people that it was on the, I feel like Forrest Gump, because I was kind of on the circumference of seeing people who I knew were doing important things. And so I came back. I thought about going to law school or going to school in D.C., but I was really pretty homesick. And came home and went to Ole Miss. Now that was a big deal for a kid from Perkinston, because Ole Miss, is 300 miles from the coast. And the first time I put my foot on the campus up there was the day I moved into my room on campus. So we weren't a family who had any ties to Ole Miss. I was kind of the black sheep of the family. All the rest of them went to Southern or State. So went there and got to meet a lot of folks that were, in my fraternity, but also who later became lawyers. And then I decided at some point in time that I would go to law school. I had been sort of majoring in pre-law, but I contemplated becoming a college professor, and my wife was was an English major as well. And she was so much smarter than I was that I really decided it would be easier to go to law school. And I might make a living, a little better living doing that. And I could see some of the things about being a teacher that I actually had the opportunity to teach there some. So I realized that it was not the easiest task in the world. And if I was going to talk to people for a living, I might translate that into getting fees for it, shall we say. So I went to law school, started the summer of 1964. We had just gotten married, and started out with some of the people that the class of 1966 is my law class, because I went straight through. We had John Fox, who was a great contracts teacher. We had Roscoe Cross, who was the property teacher. We always said there was more property up his sleeve than any other place, because he talked kind of into the cuff of his suit. We had Joel Bunkley, who taught civil procedure, and so many of these guys. Casey Stengel, and I remembered some of them the other day when we were up for the Hall of Fame, and Guff Abbott and Robert Kyatt, and the others were inducted into the Ole Miss Law School Hall of Fame. Law school was brand new to me. I had studied English history. I was a history and English major, and so I knew the origins of the English law, but I didn't have any of the buzzwords, and it took me a year, frankly, to understand what they were talking about, because I was not used to reading technical writing. I'd been used to reading history and English assignments. So this was not Shakespeare. This was the United States Supreme Court and district courts and the Mississippi Supreme Court and that sort of thing. So it was a lot of learning for me. Some kids who were from legal families. We just lost Landy Teller, who was a helpful person to me. Always lent a helping hand. His father had been a lawyer. And others there that came from what I would say there were legacies and have done so much better because of it, because they knew what it was about, kind of going in to some extent. So met a lot of friends at law school. It was a discipline that I felt like I would enjoy doing. I was excited about it. We said, I heard a New Orleans lawyer friend of mine said one time, this is a crazy, mixed up, ridiculous way to make a pretty good living. And I would have to agree with that. There are natural lawyers. There are people who are absolutely born to do this job and nothing but that. I don't characterize myself that way at all. I think I'm more of somebody who's had to learn it and study it, and I've enjoyed doing that. When we finished law school, we show you how loose things were in Oxford. We got the moving van to come to move us to the coast. This was in the days of Vietnam, and I had gotten deferments to go to law school because I was married and I was in school full time. And I was about not to be in school full time. And so I was about to be drafted. And I was fortunate enough to get in the Air National Guard in Gulfport. A friend of mine from Ole Miss had told me, you can get a slot in there and you can go and serve your time and fulfill your obligation that way. So it was a privilege to do that, but it was, I didn't particularly favor the war. And so my wife was teaching. She got a master's degree at Ole Miss, so she was teaching at the local community college here. And I went off to basic training, after graduating from law school, and that was good for me. I had a good time doing that. first 10 years of your law practice, you're sort of trying to be discovered. You know, you're getting in all these organizations and you're meeting people and you're doing all the things to try to get your name around, and you're trying to build your business and your clientele and meet people. And I really wasn't from the coast originally, but my family was from this county, so I had a lot of people up in the hinterlands who at least kind of knew about my family, and my family had a good name, so started getting some clients. And when you live on the coast, a lot of what you mark time with are the hurricanes, the storms that you go through. And I'd been practicing 2.5 years, I guess 3 years, about 2.5 years, when Hurricane Camille came. And it was an extremely severe hurricane in terms of its intensity, and caused a great deal of damage on the coast. It was just almost unbelievable. It was a tropical cyclone that came ashore and brought tornadic winds with it. So I could see, I'd been in a little law firm that had been closing loans and doing property matters and chancery matters and a few circuit cases, but mostly that. And so these people who we'd closed the loans for, we set up our shop in our little offices with Coleman lanterns, because there was no electricity, to help them fill out their proof of loss forms to file their insurance claims. And that was before they had flood insurance. So it was a question of windstorm versus rising water. And that gave room for a lot of brisk argument in court about whether it was the water or the wind. And it was purely a jury issue. So we had a lot of experience doing jury cases in a hurry. And that became just kind of routine. I went over and got the weather guy from New Orleans for the TV station over there, and hired him as my meteorologist, and we went around and saw all the places where the houses had been leveled or had been, hurt by the wind. My position was it was all wind, and kind of got started. But it got me in the courtroom because I didn't have the experiences that a lot of people do with being an assistant district attorney or something like that. I didn't do that, and getting in front of juries and actually being baptized by fire helped me, because it gave me to know that if I could get up there and put on the proof, that chances are the juries were going to do the right thing. And they weren't out of line. They really did not unload against the insurance companies. But there were cases where the insurance companies felt like they had a reason to appeal. And so just to show you how many of cases like that, I had 7 cases in the Supreme Court at one time after that storm, which was a lot for me. But that kind of got me going. And then after that, nothing was the same. I mean, you sort of saw a different coast entirely. And I'll come around to that again when we talk about Katrina, but because it kind of gives you to know that there will be a recovery, that there will be something else going on. And maybe that's a metaphor in our lives down here and maybe everywhere, but whatever the storm is, you can, if you keep on going, as Churchill said, if you're going through hell, keep going. So that was kind of how my law practice started. Incidentally, just one last thing about Camille. By that time, I had in my military career, which wasn't real distinguished, but I had become a JAG officer in the Naval Reserve Law Company, and we used to go out and do legal services for the people who were shipping out to Vietnam, and wrote a bunch of wills and powers of attorney and things like that for them, and handled appeals and that kind of thing. And we were coming back the day before that storm, Camille. I was coming from Jackson with my wife going south toward the coast, And I noticed the most remarkable thing, and that was that we were the only car going south. Everyone else was turning north and getting out of town and seeking shelter. So we just turned back around and came back to Jackson. So that worked out pretty well. The 70s, you know, I've always said that the 60s was the kind of birth of the counterculture in the United States of America and perhaps around the world. And the 70s was kind of the denigration of that and deterioration of that ideal because things kind of started getting more confusing, shall we say. We went, if you think about this period of time after President Kennedy was assassinated in 1963, 63, then you had the Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy and, you know, the whole thing about Vietnam. It was a very, very confusing time. Lots of things were going, a lot of unrest, a lot of turmoil. And, you know, if you want to put it in musical terms, you know, things went from Woodstock to Altamont pretty quick, you know. And so it kind of was like the dream was hard to keep alive, so to speak. But I saw a lot of changes during that time, and everybody did. And down here, we were still recuperating from that storm, but we were also having to do other things and getting back into the business of just being lawyers. And you know, Mississippi is just blessed with a lot of small towns. Gulfport, I don't think, is what you'd call a small town, but then the whole coast here is kind of a metropolitan area. But I find some of the lawyers that I encounter in the towns around Mississippi to be quite literally the glue that holds civilization together. I mean, if you look at I read an obituary, a friend of mine the other day that had practiced in a small town, and I found it remarkable, all the things that he had done to contribute to the good in that town, you know, and that was Billy Callender, a friend of mine from law school. It's so you know, you just get back into the business of living and getting involved in the JCs and the Chamber of Commerce and all that kind of stuff, and we got involved in the American Bar Association, and I hope all young lawyers will consider that way of adding to the profession, because I met some great people from around the country, and then we're still friends even after all those years. We had dinner with a couple in Austin, Texas not too long ago that had been our friends from the 1972 ABA convention when we first went to San Francisco and met all these people. And a funny thing happened to me out there. Thad Cochran, who is, of course, our senior senator, at that time had been a lawyer in Watkins and Eager in Jackson. But he'd been a leader. He'd been president of the Young Lawyers in Mississippi and been a leader in the bar. Well, he was slated to become one of 4 directors of the ABA Young Lawyers Division. And so that's my first time to go to a convention. I'm out there in San Francisco, and Joe Meadows and Frank Crosswade and a couple of them called me aside and said, "Come on," said, we're going to talk to the president of the ABA Young Lawyers. And I said, "What are you talking about?" And they said, "Well, you're fixing to be a national director." And so I had no idea that was going to happen. He said, "You're taking Thad Cochran's place," because by that time, see, he'd run for Congress and had been elected, so or was about to be elected. So that's how I got involved in the ABA and met wonderful people who are still friends after all these years. Several years ago, we had lunch with a bunch of them in New Orleans, and that's a camaraderie that I think is, it showed me 2 things. One was that lawyers everywhere in the United States are basically great people, you know, and secondly, that Mississippi lawyers are not only just as good as lawyers in all those other places, but really we do pretty well when we're cast in that position. And if you look around, you'll see a lot of Mississippi leaders in a lot of those ABA positions, even now. One of my law partners is going in as chair of the environmental and natural resources law, John Milner. So what I'm saying is I've seen that repeated over and over again of people that have come from Mississippi and risen to positions of leadership. Ben Griffith in the urban and state and local government law, and just many others. I'm really leaving out too many, but and David Watkins, who was chairman of the ABA Young Lawyers Division. Anyway, great people and a great experience if anybody's looking for a bunch of good folks to meet, and great place to learn new things and make business connections. I'd recommend the ABA. Now, Mississippi, in the meantime, we were doing our thing, and I wound up being involved with when you're living on the coast here, we used to have the conventions, the bar conventions at the Broadwater. It was kind of the place to go, and just like the Hilton at Sandestin is now, back in those days, the Broadwater Beach was owned by Mrs. Dorothy Brown. She kept it in first class condition. It had the best golf courses. It had the best watering holes. It had the marina. It had boats. It had everything you wanted. It was just really a full #1 resort. So we would get cast on the coast here with doing a lot of the convention stuff. And so therefore we got to know a lot of lawyers from around the state that way as well. And that was a great experience. I mean, I was the young lawyer that when Raymond Brown was the president, he got me to help with the convention. So I kind of got involved, and we enjoyed meeting all the different presidents and getting involved. And I liked the Mississippi Bar, so enjoyed being with the people, and really enjoyed the professional contacts. And I will say this, that if anybody is wondering whether they have time for participation in Bar Association events, let me assure you that it is profitable for your pocketbook as well as for your book of memories and your book of relationships. I didn't do it for that reason. I did it because I liked the people and enjoyed being with them, but honestly, it's been a real plus factor as far as my business. So anyhow, we got involved in all that, and wound up being, going up the chairs in the young lawyers and having a lot of fun. We'd always have a boat. We'd go to Ship Island on Tom Harvey's boat. He's a local businessman here, and his stepson Sean Tyndall now is in the state senate. He's a lawyer, and his mom used to be my legal secretary. So it's a small world, is what I'm saying. It's and everybody here on the coast, we're in the tourism business anyway. So we would enjoy seeing our friends that were lawyers down here. And some of those old conventions were great because you'd see the war horses of the bar. The Tally Riddell. Tally Riddell always looked like he had a Pierre Cardin dressing him or something, because he'd come out there with all these fancy sport coats, from up there in Quitman, Mississippi, and probably bought them in New Orleans or New York or somewhere. And Boyce Holloman and some of those perennial flamboyant lawyers who were great lawyers too. So we got to associate with good people. Starting in the 80s, I kind of was. I wanted to still be involved with the bar, and I'd kind of completed my time as a young lawyer, because after a certain age, you're not a young lawyer anymore. And I had a period in which I kind of got bogged down and just did practice and work, and did local things here, but nothing too much with the bar. And sometime, I guess it was in the early 80s, I was elected to the Board of Bar Commissioners. And that's another thing I would recommend to anybody, that if you can serve on your State Board of Bar Commissioners from your district, that's a good thing to do, because you learn the workings of the bar and how important that organization is for our profession. So with that sort of background, they have some of them wanted me to run for president of the bar, so and you know, let me say this, Mississippi is not like some of these states. Some of them have a kind of an inherited position. Mississippi always puts up 2 really good people. I mean, it's a competitive thing. Matter of fact, the year I ran, it was 3. So I like our system because it produces great people. And the other thing I see is that if you'll notice that the guy who doesn't get elected always does something just wonderful for the bar. They wind up being president of the Bar Foundation or president of the, you know, their law school alumni association or whatever it is, but these are all contributing people. So the fact that somebody gets elected isn't the big deal in my view, and I really felt that way when I was elected. But I enjoyed every minute of doing what I did because we traveled and went to the other bar associations and met, again, you know, I'd met a lot of these people in the ABA, but I met them in the Southern Association of Bar Presidents and again at the ABA and all that. So I kind of had the same experience again that I'd had as a young lawyer in the ABA context. Now, you know, when you're elected to the bar, you kind of think, I got to have some kind of project. I got to do something to push the profession forward. And I tried to do, I did this when I was young lawyer president, I tried to get as much minority participation. And you know, you can't say that women are the minority any longer, because I think there are about as many women lawyers as there are male lawyers. And we tried to be involve African American lawyers, lawyers from all the spectrum as far as old, young, you know, everybody that we could get, and get them involved. And in the mid '80s, we had done the I had the privilege of writing the rule to drafting it. The committee approved it, but to start the Lawyers and Judges Assistance Program. And of all the things I'm probably proudest of, that's one of the things, because I think it's helped a lot of people, including me. And you know, that's an example of how the bar can do things that really are, it's a service. I mean, that's a big deal. So by the time I got to be bar president, I was thinking, okay, what can we do? We need to, there's been all this talk about tort reform. We had just about reformed ourselves out of the legal business. You know, we'd had, there's all this stuff that they passed, that took away the statute of limitations and shortened all that and made it where you can't sue the power company except where the accident happens and all that. You can't go where the lines are. And used to, you could sue the railroad wherever they had a track, and the power company wherever they had a line and all that. Mississippi was an agrarian state, and we believed in, you know, power to the people and not so much to the corporations. So the great revolt against that began in the 80s and 90s certainly. And so by the time I got to be bar president, I thought, well, you know, we've had enough tort reform. We might ought to be thinking about court reform, because the truth is we need to support our judges. We've been fortunate to have such good judges in this state, and we needed to have an intermediate court. Well, that doesn't happen overnight. You got to have an idea somewhere. And as an aside, I will say that I had mixed feelings about whether we would be able to accomplish it, because the first junior bar meeting that I ever went to in Jackson, Mississippi, where the bar convention was that year, they were talking about reforming the JP courts. And, and some reform has happened, but it has been very gradual. It has been like a cat eating a big grind rock, okay? And it's not been an easy task. Whereas getting the intermediate court, I had a secret weapon. I got Judge Alexander from up in Oxford, and she wasn't a judge at the time. And she is wonderful, and she headed up what we appointed to be the Commission on the Courts in the 21st Century, and this was in 1991. You know, so this was a long time ago. And that commission brought out, and we called it a commission to try to make it sound a little more. And we got input from the judiciary, we got input from everybody we could, and it really looked like the Supreme Court needed help. So they came out with recommendations, and we submitted that, and ultimately the legislature was able to create the Mississippi Court of Appeals, which I think is I mean, you see as much law in there as you do anywhere else now. So that was a great accomplishment for Alan and for that commission, and I was just glad to be part of it. And meanwhile, you know, we kept on with our other programs, the disaster assistance, you know, which proved to be important later, and all of the other programs that were created by the bar. Joe Meadows had been instrumental in that federal, in helping with the state bar being involved with young lawyers' disaster assistance program. When I started out with the little law firm of Estes and Alexander, George Estes Jr. and Judge Frank Alexander, he later became a chancellor, we were a small firm, just the three of us. And in this little building where several other law firms were located, but we had something that they didn't have, and this is in 1966. We had a Xerox machine. You know, can you imagine? That was the level of high technology at that point in time. And so I've lived through all that technology, the old IBM mag cards, and it was a big deal to get a Selectric typewriter back in those days. And then, my goodness, when the fax machine arrived in the late 70s, early 80s, I mean, it was like we couldn't believe it. I was in a bond issue closing in New York one time in the mid 80s, and we had to get the receipt for the bonds, and it took about 5 minutes to get this piece of paper to go through this machine that was a fax machine. I just couldn't believe it. You know, nobody could imagine that kind of miracle happening, and now things all happen through email and on the internet. So we've seen a lot of that, and I would say that technology has been the leveler for a lot of small firms so that they can compete with larger firms. But in the meantime, other changes, we had all kind of deterioration, I would say, to the jury system. I see it kind of that way. Arbitration has become so prevalent now that you know, when you check the box on your computer, you're probably agreeing to arbitrate something. You know, when you buy an airline ticket, or you certainly when you buy a car, you know, you're signing papers that say, "Oh, I don't want a jury trial," and that's, I think, been a real difficult. I mean, it's sort of necessary for the efficiency of our justice system, but I'm not sure it produces the real justice that you have. I know of homeowners who've had to get in that trap when they sign a contract that has a little arbitration agreement. And now with the Federal Act, you know, courts want to get rid of the case, so they'll send it out for arbitration. So mediation, I think, has been a good thing. I've seen mediators, and I'm you know, been one, and I've seen cases get settled that I never thought would get settled through the intervention of an intermediary, an independent neutral, and so that's, I think, been a good thing. But you must understand that before Mississippi adopted the rules of civil procedure, everything was trial by ambush, so you could kind of go to court and everybody seemed to know what the other side had without a lot of discovery. I don't know how much we've accomplished with all these thousands of pages of depositions, but I guess it's a good thing. Certainly has been good for lawyers. But it just made justice a lot more expensive. And it's removed us, just like technology removes us from human relations. It's removed us in some ways from getting down to the real nub of the truth, which a jury could generally do in a lot of cases that I've certainly seen them do it in. At this point in my career, this is my 50th year practicing law, and I've thought quite a bit lately about what it has meant to be a lawyer, since I was the only person in my family ever to do this, and I guess the only one who has done it. And really what it comes down to is the interpersonal relationships. Starting out in a small firm, not representing the establishment. I thought I was going to be, when I was in law school, I thought I was going to be, I'll tell you this story. I came to my office one morning and my secretary came in and she said, Mr. Blackwell said, there's a couple of fellows out there and they want to talk to you. And I said, okay, well, who are they with? They said, they're with the such and such an insurance company. And I thought, well, they've discovered me, you know. They want me to be their defense lawyer here in this area. And they were trying to sell me some life insurance. They weren't the guys who were trying to hire me. They were trying to get some of my money. And I probably bought a policy from them, as I recall. Anyway, I thought I was going to be a real establishment lawyer. And instead, I turned out representing people, you know, in divorces and in workers' comp cases that had gotten injured, and in plaintiffs' cases when they had automobile accidents, and in consumer kind of cases, you know, and morphed into other kinds of law, doing corporate stuff and organizing businesses and doing bond work and doing all kind of environmental stuff and all that, government law and all. But I will have to tell you that the privilege of representing people who were human beings in need of the legal system has just been an indescribable dividend. I mean, that's a treasure. Knowing people from Yale to jail, from Park Avenue to Park Bench, I mean, that's the treasure. And I think we as lawyers, I can't repeat enough, when I look around this state and I see the people who, as I say, glue society together. My heroes in the law, one of my greatest heroes is Joel Blass, because he was from Wiggins. He was the attorney for the school board when my father was there, and he was my father's attorney. Joel spoke up when something was wrong, when something was going on, and it wasn't popular to speak up and say, wait a minute, you're discriminating against these people. You know, you're not giving them equal treatment. You know, somebody's got to have the courage to do that. And lawyers are in the unique position as a learned intermediary between the rule of law and the great unwashed. And if we don't speak up, and if we don't say, and we're the conscience of the courthouse, so to speak, then I don't know what the country will come to. That said, I'm buoyed up and optimistic about the future. And the reason I am is because I see young lawyers who have that kind of courage and who don't mind speaking up. I disagree with some of their positions on things, but you know, I find that, I'll tell you this story, and it happened, and it wasn't a lawyer, but it's meant a lot to me. I was at Ole Miss, and it was the last year I was in law school, And a guy who had been, Gerald Walton, who had been one of the assistant professors there, came in. I was in the barber shop. Now, when you're in the barber shop in Oxford, Mississippi, and it's 4 years after the Meredith riots, okay, conversation was, shall we say, not entirely wholesome sometimes. And this barber was holding forth about how he didn't like it that these people were doing this and that these people were doing that, and that things were going on like that, and that these folks think they're uppity and this is the way this is and all of that. And Gerald Walton got in the barber chair, and the barber said, "And what do you think about that, fella?" Now, Gerald's a big old rangy, blonde-haired guy with a crew cut, you know, could have been coming in on a load of logs for all that barber knew. And Gerald said, in the middle of all that crowd of people there, he said, "Well, I don't feel that way." He said, "You know, I don't think anybody ought to be the subject of discrimination, and so I can't stand for any kind of discrimination in any form." Now, you could have heard a pin drop after that. That took courage. And moments like that, when I see lawyers stand up and you know, say, "Wait a minute, this isn't what the rule of law says. You know, you're saying this, and it's popular to say this, that we can torture people or that we can, you know, commit crimes in the name of our country and all that. But really, that's not what we do as Americans." And I think I have courage and I am encouraged, shall we say, that this new generation will rise to that occasion.